Thank you very much for taking your time to attend the forum today. We would now like to start SPF Security Strategy Forum, organized by Sasakawa Peace Foundation, on policy recommendation on enhancing the foundation for human resource base of defense capabilities. I have the pleasure of serving as your moderator today. I am Marie Shibayama, Research Fellow, General Affairs and Networking Program, Japan-U.S. and Security Studies Unit. During the forum today, in Part 1, Policy Recommendation on Enhancing the Foundation of Human Resource Base of Defense Capabilities, prepared by the study group Security Strategy Studies Project, will be presented by all of the panelists who are the members of the study group. In Part 2, we plan to have panel discussion and Q&A session. The forum is scheduled to end at 5 p.m., but depending on how the forum proceeds, it may end a few minutes later. We ask for your understanding in advance. Regarding Q&A, we would like to ask you to use question form. During the forum today, we will be receiving questions and comments using online question form. If you have questions or comments, please find a piece of paper that was handed to you in the set of a booklet and program. The piece of paper that has 2D barcode or URL to access question form, and please send your question or comment before 4:20. We are not accepting oral questions by a show of hand. Before we open the forum, I would like to invite President of Sasakawa Peace Foundation, Dr. Atsushi Sunami, to give an opening remarks. President Sunami, please. Thank you for the introduction. I am Atsushi Sunami, President of Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Thank you for attending the forum today. This is an open forum, SPF Security Strategy Forum, policy recommendation on enhancing the foundation for human resource base of defense capabilities, organized by General Affairs and Networking Program, Japan-U.S. and Security Studies Unit. At the outset of this forum, I would like to touch upon the current security environment. Japan faces the most arduous and complex security environment since the end of the war. Thus, the government of Japan published National Security Strategy at the end of 2022 to ensure peace and security of Japan. In that strategy, the government strongly pushes for the fundamental enhancement of defense capabilities. In order to strengthen the capabilities of SDF personnel, who are the core of defense capabilities, in October last year, ministerial meeting on improving the treatment and working environments and establishing new lifetime career plans of self-defense forces personnel, chaired by the Prime Minister, was established to consider the strengthening of human resource base, and basic policy was published as a result. As you can see from this, currently efforts are made to improve the treatment of SDF personnel and to improve the recruitment situation at a very quick pace. Sasakawa Peace Foundation is supporting the measures to strengthen the human resource base of defense capabilities by the government. In the meantime, as a think tank, we felt providing recommendations from the third-party perspective would also help in the government's efforts. In April last year, we asked policy and practice experts on security to serve as members of the study group to consider the strengthening of human resource base of defense capabilities. All members deliberated, contributing bold ideas not bound by the confines of the conventional thinking. This time, as an interim outcome, policy recommendation on enhancing the foundation for human resource base of defense capabilities was submitted to the defense minister on the 7th of this month, and at the same time, we are also publicly announcing the recommendation today. And the recommendation will be presented by the members of the study group. First, let me introduce the chair of the study group, Mr. Tetsuro Kuroe, former Administrative Vice Minister of Defense, General Koji Yamazaki, former Chief of Staff of the Joint Staff, Admiral Yutaka Murakawa, former Chief of Staff, JMSDF, Lieutenant General Tadashi Miyagawa, former Director General of Defense Intelligence Headquarters, and Vice Admiral Hiroshi Shibata, former Director General of the Naval Systems ATLA, Ms. Sakura Bayashi, writer on defense issues, and Rear Admiral Yasuhiro Kawakami, who is the Director of General Affairs and Networking Program, Japan-U.S. and Security Studies Unit at Sasakawa Peace Foundation. They will present a policy recommendation, and I hope through Q&A with the audience, we will be able to deepen discussion on measures to be taken to reinforce the human resource base of defense capabilities of Japan. On a personal note, my father was also working for self-defense forces. And at home, occasionally, and since my father is getting older, sometimes he mentions the need to improve treatment of SDF personnel. I hope the recommendation as well as the forum today will be of help in reinforcing the foundation for human resource base in defense capabilities for Japan. Thank you very much.
President Sunami, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to start part one, the presentation of policy recommendation by the panelists. All the panelists, you're kindly requested to come onto the stage. Today, following the presentation of policy recommendation, there's going to be part two, panel discussion, and a question and answer session in total 1 hour for that part. If you have a question, and please fill in the question form by 4:20. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to start the presentation of the policy recommendation. I would like to introduce the panelists. And first, the chair of the Security Strategy Studies Project, Mr. Tetsuro Kuroe, former Administrative Vice Minister of Defense. Former Chief of Staff, General Koji Yamazaki. Former Chief of Staff, JMSDF, Admiral Yutaka Murakawa. Former Director General of DIH, Lieutenant General Tadashi Miyagawa. Former Director General of the Naval Systems ATLA, Vice Admiral Hiroshi Shibata. A defense writer and the defense researcher, Ms. Misa Sakura Bayashi. The director of Japan-U.S. and Security Studies Unity, Sasakawa Peace Foundation, Rear Admiral Yasuhiro Kawakami. So this is the list of the 7 panelists. I would like to hand off the microphone to Ms. Misa Sakura Bayashi, who will serve as the moderator come panelist. Over to you, Ms. Sakura Bayashi. Now I would like to take over the moderation. The first part is going to the policy recommendation on enhancing the foundation for human resource base of defense capabilities. Part 2 is panel discussion and a question and answer session. I am expecting a lot of questions to be raised, and we're looking forward to them. We would like to entertain as many questions as possible. If you have a question, please fill in the question form. We are looking forward to your questions. Now, without further ado, we would like to start the presentation on the recommendation items. First, I would like to hand over the microphone to Mr. Kuroe and to give us the overview of the recommendation.
Thank you. This is Kuroe. Then, regarding the recommendation overall, I would like to give a brief overview. As President Sunami mentioned in his opening remarks, in 2022, National Security Strategy was put together, which mentions that the current security environment surrounding Japan is the most severe and complex since the end of the war. In addition, as you know, under Trump 2.0, international affairs are going through very turbulent times and are becoming very fluid. In the midst of this, the government is spending 5 years to to double the defense spending to fundamentally strengthen defense capabilities. On the other hand, regarding the equipment, budget will be increased as indicated by this. In the midst of this, when we look at the recruitment of SDF personnel, it is a struggle. For example, in fiscal 2023, the plan was to hire around 20,000, but only half of the positions were filled. Regarding this, the government is also reinforcing efforts, and Ministry of Defense is also implementing various measures over the few years to improve treatment of SDF personnel. And last year, under the leadership of Prime Minister Ishiba, ministerial meeting was held. This is not only by the Ministry of Defense, but government-wide efforts are made to improve treatment of SDF personnel. On the other hand, in Japan, we are faced with a very serious problem of declining population. Last year, in fiscal 24, the target of recruitment in terms of age bracket is people above the age of 18, and this has declined from 1.84 million to 1.06 million by 40%, and in 18 years it will decline by further 30%. So it is becoming very serious. And not with the improvement measures for treatment of SDF personnel, there likely will be a limit. This is a challenge that all of Japan is facing. So not SDF alone, but a public service sector and also private sector are faced with shortage of labor. There is fierce competition over talent. Government continues to take measures, but can it guarantee improved treatment only for SDF? Are current measures sustainable? That is the awareness of issues by our study group. The government-wide efforts to improve treatment of SDF personnel is, to be honest, quite unthinkable when we were in active duty, and therefore highly commendable. However, on the other hand, those efforts alone are limited. From different perspective, we need to explore what can be done, and that is what we at the project team discussed, and we were conscious of the following. If we use the analogy of baseball, since this is a recommendation from a think tank, we want to throw a high pitch, but if it's too high a pitch, it will be difficult to bat. But if we use ingenuity, those who are involved, if they use creative ideas to hit the ball may be hittable. That is the type of ball that we would like to pitch. So as a basic approach, we are attempting approach from three different directions. First, reinforcement of social infrastructure. The second is organizational reform by SDF itself. And the third is encouragement of public-private cooperation. As for social infrastructure, to be honest, social infrastructure supporting SDF in Japan cannot be said to be strong, or rather it is weak. In the last 70 years, thanks to the efforts of our forebears, the support for SDF and favorability impression of SDF are rising, but the significance of national defense and the need of national defense are not still understood as something that is a personal issue. And as a reflection of that, is there a respect for those who are engaged in national defense duties? That is not necessarily the case, and those are areas we would like to see improvements to reinforce social infrastructure. The second is security environment change. SDF is also conducting research of this, but in view of new situation, we also have to devise new ways of fighting, and accordingly, in Japan domestically, there is shortage of labor, and the awareness of younger generation is changing. There is also greater labor mobility, generally speaking. Looking at these trends, SDF itself must reform its organization itself on its own volition. That is the second point. And the third is public-private cooperation. As I've mentioned earlier, Japan overall is facing shortage of labor. On the other hand, in security, there are many issues and challenges. As in all sectors, the number of challenges is increasing. With fewer people, how can we address greater number of challenges? Amongst those involved, there has to be cooperation. That is the only way. In that respect, in defense area, public-private cooperation should be advanced. That is the third perspective. And briefly, according to the table of content, I would like to first discuss reinforcement of social infrastructure, and recommendations 2, 3, 7, and 8 are related to this under recommendation 2. In comparison to other professions such as public servants or private sector employment, what is different regarding SDF personnel? They are engaged in work of very special nature, and that must be once again realized by the public as a whole. That is recommendation 2. And based on that recommendation, and the details of the recommendation 2 will be discussed later, but SDF personnel is engaged in very dangerous work at the risk of sacrificing their lives, and they are also imposed with very strict responsibilities, and therefore, accordingly, they need to be compensated, and therefore, treatment of SDF personnel must be improved. Beyond what was done by the government, there has to be improved the treatment of SDF personnel. That is recommendation 3. Because of the special characteristics of SDF profession and the need of national defense, that needs to be understood by the public, and education, therefore, is necessary. Recommendation 8, this is efforts on its own volition, SDF work of the profession of SDF personnel. How can we have better understanding of the public, of this profession, in terms of public relations? We believe more can be done. That is recommendation 8. As for SDF as organizational transformation, it is mentioned in recommendations 4 and 5. In recommendation 4, in areas where SDF personnel only can fulfill duties, SDF organization should be limited to that. In brief, it should be focused on fighting areas, and other areas may be outsourced to private sectors, and AI and automations may be introduced. And human resource and education, human resource development and education should prepare SDF personnel to also transfer into private sector. It was confined within SDF to hire SDF personnel and to train them to become SDF personnel. However, Gen Z people, younger people, will experience different professions to improve their skills in many cases. And as one such step, SDF personnel can be positioned. This results in win-win relationship. That is one idea. Such flexibility is called for, and that is included in recommendation 4. And retired SDF personnel should be utilized more in the society, and that leads to bold proposal. And this also is related to diversifying the working style of reserve SDF personnel. Lastly, on public-private cooperation, this is discussed under recommendation 6. What can be done in peace times and what can be done in crisis situation and in emergencies? What public-private cooperation is possible, and what kind of institutional arrangement is necessary to enable such cooperation need to be considered, and compensation and support for cooperating corporations must also be taken into account. Briefly, that is the overview of the recommendation. Thank you very much. This recommendation is an interim report. So you may find this is lacking, that is lacking, but this is the interim recommendation, and the gist of the recommendation was presented by the chair. First, now turning to recommendation 1, continued government-wide reviews, including of the reinforcement of social infrastructure. General Yamazaki, please. I would like to brief you on recommendation 1. For the government, the most important responsibility is to ensure independence and peace of Japan and to protect the life and peaceful life of nation with resolute determination. Securing SDF personnel, of course, must be carried out by the Ministry of Defense and SDF as their responsibility, but the national defense is fundamental to the existence and survival of a nation, and thus is the most important government responsibility. As you may be aware of, there was an opinion survey by the Cabinet Office in November 2022. As the chair mentioned, 90% of Japanese have favorable impression of SDF. However, in fiscal 2023, looking at the recruitment situation, although target was 20,000, only 50% or around 10,000 were hired as SDF personnel. There is constant shortfall in the number of self-defense forces personnel. Taking into account this critical situation, under the strong leadership of Prime Minister Ishiba, last October, ministerial meeting on improving the treatment on working environment and establishing new lifetime career plans of self-defense forces personnel was established to consider 3 points: improvement of treatment of SDF personnel, improvement of living and working environment, and establishment of new life career plans. And the outcome was reflected immediately in the fiscal 25 draft budget. The national government was also able to indicate the basic policy on how to proceed going forward. This is quite commendable, and this is a groundbreaking, epoch-making as government initiative. This is quite unprecedented, but the quickness of this outcome is an attestation of the leadership of the Prime Minister and the government. Led by the Prime Minister, government-wide efforts were made. Looking at these policies, so far, Ministry of Defense and Self-Defense Forces have implemented various measures, and there are also items to be carried out by the Ministry of Defense and Self-Defense Forces included. However, there is a reality that these measures can be implemented not only by the Ministry of Defense, and therefore, ministerial meeting should not be of temporary nature. There should be a continuous consideration under any administration, and this should not stay as a plan, but execution of the plan is very important. Next, recommendation regarding what were considered. In addition to 3 items that I've mentioned earlier, the reinforcement of social infrastructure to support SDF personnel must be included. Looking at the social infrastructure, I would like to cite some examples. According to the Cabinet Office Public Opinion Survey, asked the question, what would you do if Japan was invaded by a foreign country? Those who answered, I would volunteer for self-defense forces, was only 4.7%. According to the World Values Survey, the question says, of course, we all hope that there will never be another war, but if it were to come to that, would you be willing to fight for your country? That was one of the questions in the survey, and in Japan, only 13% answered yes. This was the lowest amongst the countries surveyed. For your information, highest percentage, 96% answered yes in Vietnam, 88% in China said yes, 59% answered yes in the US. And this shows the aspect of social infrastructure supporting SDF today. These survey results are likely due to the long-standing sense of aversion to military affairs since the end of the war, the positioning of self-defense forces under the Constitution, poor education concerning security, and the prevalence of individualism. In order to reinforce social infrastructure supporting the SDF, it is essential to have a better understanding of the citizens about the importance of national defense and sense of respect for those who serve for the public to defend the country and those who volunteer to do so. To secure stable SDF personnel of high quality for national defense under that resolute determination, government-wide consideration was made in wide-ranging fashion. And the effectiveness of such policies must also be validated. If measures are not effective, the cause should be analyzed. And until the results are achieved, until there is enough recruitment of SDF personnel, there should be a continuation of this process. With such a cycle of process, this should enable secure ensuring stable number of self-defense forces personnel. Once again, Chair Kuroe, could you discuss recommendation 2, re-acknowledgement of the special character of self-defense forces personnel? We believe it's indispensable to re-acknowledge the special character of self-defense forces to reinforce social infrastructure. First, the duty is dangerous and difficult. As you know, since the establishment, SDF has spent 70 years and has never engaged in combat. However, there are already more than 2,100 who have died in the line of duty. Even during training, they're exposed to danger, and they are also imposed with stringent obligations. This is discussed in our recommendation, but there is a pledge by SDF personnel. They should disregard the danger and respond to the trust placed by the people with their life. And they must not avoid danger in their duty. This is an obligation imposed on the SDF personnel, and this obligation was determined by the National Diet. National Diet represents the will of the people, and therefore this is based on the will of the people. Therefore, there should be awareness not only amongst SDF personnel, but by all of the public, that this is expected of SDF personnel. There should be a wider recognition, and that will be the first point to reinforce social infrastructure and residence restrictions, 24/7 working and retirement restrictions. They also do not have labor rights in the private sector, similar to the private sector. Retirement is at younger age. And after retirement, they have to spend many years. There are such anxieties, and same applies for family. They have to relocate quite frequently, which is burdensome on the families. And this needs to be understood very well amongst the public. This special character of the duties are what are imposed on self-defense forces personnel. This needs to be understood widely. We believe that that will be the first step to reinforce the social infrastructure.
Thank you very much. Next, to recommendation 3, improvement of the treatment of SDF personnel. I would like to give the microphone to Rear Admiral Kawakami, the head of Japan-U.S. Security Strategies Unit. This is Kawakami. Thank you very much. With regard to recommendation 3, first, with regard to the improvement of the treatment of SDF personnel, including recommendation 1, there should be the whole of the government approach to be applied. This is supposed to be the precondition. And recommendation 2, we have to re-recognize the uniqueness of the self-defense forces so that there should be appropriate treatment and then support to their families. There should be an approach to be taken with regard to decorations and the benefits and to be supplied and to the active service persons. There should be insufficient items to be identified, and we would like to make proposals on this. First of all, the fact that not only the Ministry of Defense but the government as a whole is working to improve the treatment of SDF personnel is unprecedented and highly commendable, as the chair mentioned. On top of that, in light of the severe security environment surrounding Japan and aforementioned special characteristics of SDF personnel, we have to take up matters that are not included in the basic policy but are crucial. Number 1, the National Compensation Pension System, which is a tentative naming, is going to be the centerpiece of the treatment of improvement. Therefore, I will mention this in detail at the end. First, regarding number 2, the reconsideration of the systems necessary for emergencies. There are 3 authoritarian countries are located around Japan, and 2 of which are currently at war. And the other one has the potential to cause a Taiwan contingency. It is necessary, therefore, to prepare for the system necessary in the event of a war from the peacetime. And it is also necessary to start preparing for the system necessary in the event of an emergency from now on, such as concrete consideration of the appropriate defense mobilization basic allowance and defense mobilization special duty allowance. And further, decorations for active duty personnel should be considered. Even if you don't want to think about it, when fighting breaks out, a large number of SDF personnel may be injured or killed in action. Such a scenario may cause the current multi-aid association-based pension system to fail, incapable of compensate injured SDF personnel for their entire lives and pay pensions to the bereaved family members. This kind of consideration and should start right now. Next, number 4. Please take a look at number 4. Education that utilizes the strength of unit education to advance individual careers is another proposal. This is one way to address the difficulty of recruiting SDF personnel. The difficulty of recruiting military personnel is a common problem across the national borders. Military education and work experiences are attractive career plan, contributing to an increase in the number of applications. For example, in the UK, few companies want to hire new graduates because they need people who can contribute immediately to the job, while the military is one of the few organizations that continues to hire new graduates. That's what we are told. And taking advantage of this characteristic, the military office offers training immediately after joining the military in social etiquette as a working adult, physical training, and opportunities to improve technical skills, which makes it more attractive to potential recruits. In other words, joining the military is seen as offering benefits beyond money. On the other hand, in the case of self-defense forces, currently enlisted personnel recruits are provided with a short-term training period of 3 months, but this tends to be specialized in training SDF personnel and does not necessarily take into consideration education as a member of society or a professional or re-employment after discharge. The idea is to attract more applicants by giving them the benefit of being able to improve the potential professional and specialized skills by joining the self-defense forces. To achieve this, it is necessary to make the self-defense forces more attractive and increase the number of recruits by deliberately expanding the introductory education that is required to be specialized for the self-defense forces. In other words, in addition to basic education and physical training required as a member of society, by implementing education to improve specialized skills required in society, such as AI and cyber, the idea is to make the self-defense forces more attractive to recruits for more than just money. At the same time, I believe this will lead to maintaining the fortitude of the unit. In addition, the attractiveness of unit education leads to an increase in re-enlistments and applications and recruitment from the private sector. And if personnel who have undergone education in the self-defense forces become reserve personnel after discharge, I believe it will also lead to a strengthening of the system. Number 3. Institutionalization of welfare support for the families of SDF personnel in peacetime and in wartime has 2 major elements. Welfare support for the families of SDF personnel is also important due to the unique nature of SDF personnel who engage in dangerous and difficult duties without regard for their lives under severe constraints in peacetime and wartime. For example, I myself am a retired SDF personnel. But when I was an active officer, especially when I was a junior officer, I was transferred across Japan every year. And in a short period, I was transferred from Yokosuka to Sasebo in Kyushu, and then from Sasebo to Ominato, Aomori, in 6 months. Also, when I was on a JMSDF vessel, I was notified of transfer while on the voyage, and I was transferred on December 27th, 3 days after the ship arrived in port. And my family, or more specifically my wife, had to do everything for the relocation. I consider this one of the unique characteristics of SDF personnel in peacetime. Another element is that, as a lesson learned from the past battles, soldiers with happy families are said to be the strongest. I think this is the fact that can be retrieved from the past records. In other words, in order for the SDF to be strong enough, the government needs a system to thoroughly protect not only the SDF personnel, but also their families, both in peacetime and wartime, so that they can fight with the peace of mind. In other words, it is about supporting families as a fighting force. As a concrete example, there is a need to consider establishing a support system for the families of self-defense force personnel at the same level as the support system for military families that is institutionalized in the U.S. military and many other militaries. In order to provide compensation to the families of those killed in the line of duty in the event of emergency and to maintain the vitality of self-defense force personnel. And then, for example, the support to the families and should also be tailored to the social conditions in Japan. For example, in the U.S., there is the PX system, and which allows U.S. military personnel and their families to purchase inexpensively daily necessities, and the free train fares provided to military personnel in Germany and South Korea when they return home and to their families. Needless to say, there should be the Japanese approach to be adopted, so the other countries' experience cannot be directly imported, but they can be used as a reference point. And lastly, what is important is the establishment of a national compensation pension system, a tentative naming. This is a proposal for special post-retirement treatment in response to the uniqueness of SDF personnel. At the same time, this system will also lead to an increase in the number of people who want to join the SDF. For example, in the case of U.S. military personnel, there are various post-retirement benefits, including a defined benefit, which is fully funded by the National Treasury, and defined contribution, which is paid by both employer and the employee and has tax benefits, and the so-called national pension, which is a social security benefit system. This system is not limited to the U.S. and the overseas surveys conducted by the research group. We found that similar military pension systems also exist in the UK, Germany, and Australia. On the other hand, in Japan, there is no system that gives preferential treatment to SDF personnel like other countries. In light of this situation, and in light of this kind of situation, we propose the creation of a national compensation pension and system, not only to reduce the income disadvantage of early retirement as a compensation for other national civil servants who work until age 65 and receive a salary, but also as a compensation for the severe duties and strict obligations of SDF personnel. For example, we propose a three-tiered pension system for SDF personnel, which can be realized within the Japanese pension system and is based on the aforementioned system in the United States. That is to provide a third tier funded by the National Treasury in addition to the government employee, general employee pension, and national pension. This is supposed to be the outline of the national compensation pension system. This is the overview. Now, next, recommendation 4. Reorganization of the self-defense forces and to survive the severe era of population decline. General Yamazaki. Allow me to make a report on this. We're assuming that we will need to respond appropriately to the future warfare styles. It is necessary to carry out organizational reforms in order to build a comprehensive defense capability for Japan well into the future. Whatever the situation will be, we have to put in place the defense capability that will defend our country. For that to be achieved, we have to go through the organizational reforms, which is crucially important. Currently, as you may know, we have the 3 national security documents, including the National Security Strategy. And out of the fundamental reinforcement of our capability, the standoff defense capabilities, integrated air and missile defense capabilities, unmanned asset defense capabilities, and cross-domain operation capabilities. 7 areas are highlighted, and we are going to pay attention to the capabilities of the opponents while we are going to promote new way of fighting. And the standoff defense capability will be utilized and own counter attack capabilities. And JMSDF, Joint Operations Command, was recently established in order to deal with a new style of warfare. And we are also going to expand the capability of the U.S.-Japan joint operation capabilities, and that would bring us more different needs. Under these circumstances, I think we have to put in place the well-established scheme. We have the rapid declining birth rate, and there's going to be a shortage, which is worsening. How we are going to deal with that is going to be the approach that must be adopted. And from this perspective, there are major items that need dealt with. There are 3 of them. First, the self-defense forces will be reorganized into organizations specializing in areas that only self-defense forces force personnel can handle. Modern warfare is characterized by the lack of a clear distinction between military and non-military. The land, sea, and air domains are largely divided into combat domains and domains that support combat. Many of the latter domains will be transferred into the private sector by utilizing external forces and retired SDF personnel. The new domain areas, including cyberspace and space, there is ongoing military civilization into civilian integration. And the same can be true for the education of the SDF personnel and work of garrisons and bases. SDF's work should be separated into those that can only be performed by SDF personnel and those that can utilize external forces and retire the SDF, and the latter should be actively transferred into the private sector with the personnel capacity quota allocated to the new defense needs. There's going to be the necessity of the security clearance system, and there should be appropriate reforms. And then the second point is about the the artificial intelligence labor saving and unmanned equipment. There should be the decision-making superiority should be used. The use of AI is crucial. AI is also effective in a wide range of routine operation processes. The introduction of manpower saving and unmanned equipment is one of the lessons learned from the Russian-Ukrainian ongoing war. It can also embody advanced fighting methods. The introduction of AI and manpower saving and unmanned equipment is an effective means of dealing with the population decline and should be realized as soon as possible. Third, we will introduce a personnel training system that makes extensive use of talented human resources from the private sector. In the space and cyberspace domains, military-civilian integration technologies are emerging. There is also affinity with the private sector in functional fields such as information, communication, sanitation, transportation, supply, and maintenance. Currently, there is a high degree of job mobility, especially among young people. They tend to aspire to satisfaction, sense of growth, and career development. The self-defense forces are a highly skilled group of people dedicated to the defense of a country, not found in other organizations. And I believe that combined with the measures such as so-called job-type recruitment and improved treatment, it is expected that the self-defense forces will capture the aspirations of young people and secure talented private sector personnel. This will also make it possible to actively incorporate excellent private and sector knowledge. Those who resign mid-career and gain experience in the private sector and wish to re-enlist should be properly evaluated for the experience and be employed with treatment commensurate with it. Until now, the self-defense forces have mainly recruited new graduates from high schools and universities and have implemented personnel education management from enlistment to discharge. In addition, that is opposed to the lifelong employment and system. That concept is applied. In addition to this, into the future, personnel education management should be introduced that actively promotes recruitment from the private sector in all ranks and fields. That means mid-career employment and recruitment. That kind of approach should be adopted. Basically, there's going to be the in-organization and training program to be offered. However, we also have to expect mid-career employments. The employment system should be changed flexibly.
Thank you. Moving on to recommendation 5, bold revision of the SDF reserve personnel system. Admiral Murakawa, please. Thank you. This is Murakawa. Recommendation 5, bold revision of the SDF reserve personnel system. Militaries of foreign countries have reservist systems in many cases. This ensures ability to mobilize citizens who have past experience of serving in the military and supplements active duty military personnel in normal times, modeled after these to secure defense human capabilities. SDF reserve personnel system, comprising mainly retired SDF personnel, was established in 1954 at the same time as the establishment of SDF. In fiscal 1997, the SDF Ready Reserve Personnel System was introduced as a consequence of the reduction of the force size of JMSDF. In fiscal 2001, candidates for SDF Reserve Personnel System was introduced to utilize human resources who have specialist skills in the private sector. However, in recent years, the percentage of position filled with respect to the capacity of 47,900 reserve self-defense forces personnel is 70% at 33,000, and only 50% for SDF Ready Reserve personnel at around 4,000 out of the capacity of 7,981, and those who volunteer are decreasing in number. In emergencies, to sustain warfighting capabilities, it is necessary to deploy active duty SDF personnel rapidly and in well-planned manner. In Japan currently, the only human resources that can be deployed in such a way are the SDF Ready Reserve personnel and SDF Reserve personnel. For example, in the United States, about 40% of the total number of military personnel are reservists. Not only in emergencies, but during exercises, they supplement the active duty military personnel. On the other hand, looking at the actual number of reserve personnel in SDF, they account for only 15% of the total number of SDF personnel. As mentioned earlier, there's critical shortage of the manpower. Total force size of SDF should be supplemented in the peacetime and in emergencies. And this is urgently needed, so we would like to make a 3-point proposal in relation to this. First is establishing social reputation for reserve personnel. The biggest reason that there are few volunteers is the difficulty of combining both the workplace and training. Many retired self-defense forces personnel are re-employed in companies and elsewhere, but we often hear that they have difficulty managing work in the workplace in order to participate in training for reserve. We should foster the shared understanding amongst companies and within the government, where SDF reserve personnel are respected as exemplary representatives who fulfill the civic obligation, while at the same time sufficient compensations for companies should be considered so that companies can actively support the SDF reserve personnel. Next, revision of the work style of reserve personnel. Under the current system, SDF reserve personnel are required to participate in certain training and respond to recall for defense, disaster relief, and citizen protection duties. On the other hand, in foreign countries, there are cases where reservists support the military duties by working for fixed term or part-time flexibly. in view, and for example, in Australia, where we conducted a survey not only in logistics support, but transport plane pilot and the crew of the submarines included reservists who participated in training together with the active duty personnel. And there are also joint training of active and reservist personnel. Given the chronic shortage of personnel in SDF, based on the adjustment with partner companies, reserve personnel concurrent position in the private sector and reserve duties should be considered. And the third is improved treatment of reservists. At the end of last year, in the ministerial meeting, basic policy was published, which also included the establishing the environments for self-defense force personnel treatment, including career planning, lifelong career planning. After retirement from SDF duties over many years, are they psychologically ready to continue to be on duty as reserve self-defense forces? This is an enormous burden, and if it is deemed as a side job, it will be difficult to secure those who volunteer. In addition to eligibility to receive similar healthcare and welfare benefits as active duty personnel, as pointed out in recommendation 3, new pension system proposed should also be provided to prepare an environment in which SDF personnel and their family and reserve personnel can take pride and feel reassured about the work as reserve personnel. Thank you very much. Next, recommendation 6, encouragement of private-public cooperation. Vice Admiral Shibata, please. Thank you. I would like to present recommendation 6, encouragement of private-public cooperation. Chair Kuroe and General Yamazaki mentioned that due to declining in population, it has become difficult to maintain the current structure of SDF. But from the perspective of enhancing the human resource-based foundation for SDF, we propose encouragement of seamless private-public cooperation. First, encouraging outsourcing through utilization of private sector capabilities. When reinforcing the human resource base of the self-defense forces, one important technique is the encouragement of outsourcing through the utilization of private sector capabilities. In particular, logistics outsourcing will enable redeployment of SDF personnel who are engaged in those operations to the frontline units, with the expectation that current structure and strength can be maintained. By encouraging joint development and joint operations structure through private-public cooperation, various latest technologies that private sector companies have can be introduced at an early timing without assigning large number of personnel. Assuming emergency scenario, transportation network deployment through outsourcing and development of alternative network through cooperation with private sector communications carriers to prepare for attacks on the communication infrastructure of SDF are ways to prepare for personnel shortages in emergency situation. The second point is enhancement of information war capabilities through public-private cooperation on promotion of information and data sharing. In gray zone, more intense cyber attacks and information warfare are anticipated. Therefore, cooperation with technology companies need to be encouraged to strengthen defense system against information warfare. On the other hand, to promote public-private cooperation, both public and private sector companies need to share the same information and operational data in their activities. For that purpose, measures are necessary to promote the appropriate handling of information and operational data with the companies that provide cooperation to strengthen information security. The third point is greater efforts in public-private cooperation and training, including training of SDF personnel in private sector companies. For the purpose of improving the skills, physical fitness, and health management of SDF personnel, wide-scale introduction of training and education at private sector companies and use of private sector coaches will lead to increased opportunities to learn the latest technologies, and findings are expected to improve the appeal of the job of SDF personnel and to help in recruiting. However, private sector companies' ability to respond to emergencies are limited if cooperation and training are not adequate, rapid response becomes difficult, and cooperation may not be maintained seamlessly. Therefore, from the normal times among Ministry of Defense, self-defense forces, and private sector companies, there should be a regular training to share information and enhance cooperation to ensure structure that will allow smooth cooperation with private sector. The last point in this recommendation is development of guidelines to facilitate public-private cooperation for private sector companies under various different situations. In encouraging public-private cooperation and to maintain that seamless cooperation structure, there is a challenge that this may increase the risk of private sector companies being targeted by hostile forces for obstruction, sabotage, and information gathering in emergencies. There is a concern of public opinion backlash and anxiety amongst the employees who engage in public-private cooperation. Especially, there can be greater exposure to risk, so guidelines should be established to define roles and responsibilities between the public-private sector, and financial support for cooperation and compensation for damage, as well as measures to secure the safety of cooperating companies during emergencies should be considered. As presented thus far, private sector cooperation is indispensable to reinforce the human resource base of self-defense forces. Inclusive of these recommendations, it is required to prepare an environment conducive to public-private cooperation.
Recommendation 7, reinforcement of security education as a social infrastructure of the entire nation. The presenter is Lieutenant General Miyagawa. And within the first approach, that is regarding the reinforcement of a social infrastructure, one of them is the educational system. How this security sense is going to be raised. 3 points. First point, enhancing security education in schools. As you may know, throughout elementary, junior high, and senior high school, revised a course of study guidelines, which are supposed to be revised every 10 years. The social studies for the junior high and elementary school, the love for the country and prosperity, and protecting citizens from natural disasters, police and self-defense forces, and fire services. The role of them are touched upon in the course of study. They are supposed to be the introductory part relating to the national defense. When it comes to senior high, there is a civic class, for example, national sovereignty, territory, and national security and defense. Those items are supposed to be picked up in the civic classes under the revised course of study. So there is a gradual approach that is being taken. But in reality, whether this kind of stuff is being taught and to the students at schools, they are still very insufficient at the moment. Therefore, I think relevant relevant ministries should review the current situation. With regard to the university, there is no course of study to be applied. Therefore, they are supposed to do it on their own. There is no guideline to be applied. Therefore, I think there should be the one-through approach from the viewpoint of the national security education that should be applied and from elementary schools to the university. Second point is about increasing opportunities for security education. For example, as you may know and you witness in Tokyo, that the students and the pupils sometimes visit national diet, and there is so-called the field research activity and social research activity that is being promoted by schools. Going forward, the self-defense forces facilities and museums the national security and the national sovereignty related museum, which is located close to this place, I think we should give opportunities for them to make visits to those facilities. Not only the teachers, but also the students' parents and the professionals and experts. They can accompany the visit so that the students will be able to have better opportunity for deeper understanding. And in the case of the higher education level, we do not have national security faculties located in any universities. I am really looking forward to the situation and that the International Affairs Department and faculties similar to them, the national security faculties can be established anew. Aside from them, then there should be the national security courses to be offered to students at universities. And think tanks and universities can collaborate to organize seminars so that throughout the whole educational system, there should be a rising interest on national security issues. The last point is the establishment of facilities and expansion of training opportunities to achieve the targets I've been talking about. In the overseas surveys, there are national museums and public information centers, and then they are supposed to be the facilities that the students make visits. For example, the National Museum that is dedicated to national security, it may need to be established, and this kind of resource should be provided. Therefore, the national security should serve as the basis of the social infrastructure. One of the methods is education. This is the gist of the proposal. I do believe it is going to make great contribution and to the reinforcement of national security. And that's all from me. Thank you very much. Next, recommendation 8, encouragement of understanding of the work of self-defense and forces, and I'm going to take over. Now, I'm a writer by profession, and so I think I have a lot of connections with the public relations staff. For example, the Ground, Maritime, Air Self-Defense Force, and Joint Staff Office. Those officers in uniform are working very hard at this kind of for this kind of public relations work. I think that the public relations, the self-defense forces, are a risky job. Despite that it is kind of a public relations work, and that is in some sense riskier than their fundamental task. For the self-defense force and staff, they are working hard at this kind of unfamiliar task. X or SNS can be used, and so that unit can send out information. They are working very hard in this kind of public relations work, but in the case of an accident, for example, that external communications staff make announcements. But they are working very hard to make announcements, but sometimes they would not deliver expected results. At the same time, those staff are reassigned to different jobs every 2 years and coming back into their major task at the unit. In the past, some of the public relations and team work as a bridge between the SDF and the media, but the security environment has changed significantly in recent years, so the public relations also need to change. The strategic, the PR, which is a buzzing word, I think this is extremely important and to the defense activities themselves. And in particular in Japan, the SDF has face a very severe recruitment situation. So instead of just a PR, the PR activity should be related and to better recruitment results. So it is no longer making people aware of their activities, but they should set clear goals to achieve them. PR should be a means for the PR's sake. It's not a goal for its sake. PR is a means. Professional knowledge is essential for this. Media companies had to be involved in the past, and then the self-defense forces were the ones that monitor and control those media companies. But at the same time, going forward, we have to be more motivated to deliver results. For example, if there's going to be a public opinion poll to be conducted by the media company, that the SDF has to be sensitive to the results, whether that media work is based on the professional skills. And another point I would like to highlight is the promotion of understanding of SDF by the families. I think the treatment of self-defense forces is related to the treatment of the families, but it should be done from the viewpoint of PR. So in this regard, I think that the self-defense forces personnel believe that their families should not be treated separately, or they should not be given special treatment. I do understand that situation, but their families stay very close to the SDF personnel themselves. Therefore, I think they are the ones, they know best about the SDF. However, the reality is it is not uncommon for the people who should be closest to them aren't family with the SDF. I sometimes talk to SDF personnel wives, and sometimes they don't know where their husbands are working. There is such a situation. The family members are potential public relations agents. If that is the case, instead of just a better treatment of the family members, but we should use our wisdom to get them to support SDF public relations. A large number of SDF-related personnel. If the size is relatively large, and if we are going to approach them from the viewpoint of the PR activities, we can expect more positive results. And on top of that, if they are going to feel that the staying in the SDF would be advantageous and beneficial to them. PR activities may target the remote audience, but sometimes we forget the close audience, about 240,000 SDF personnel, which is in shortage, but on top of that, their families and relatives, active and retired personnel. The number is going to multiply. In fact, I wrote a book about the defense industry. So those who are working in the defense industry, if their number is added, for example, approximately 1,200 tank manufacturing companies and approximately 8,300 destroyer manufacturing companies, they are also included in this circle. And if it is going to be a positive response from those people, then that would be beneficial to the PR. And another important point is what to publicize. The SDF has to establish a grand goal that has to be well established if it is going to be outsourced to the private sector. The impression gained through overseas surveys was that, which has already been mentioned, joining the military that is, joining the military is perceived as something that is rewarding. For example, the pension. Well, I thought that would be the comment made by the people overseas. But instead of that kind of rewarding rewards, but the self-fulfillment, that means putting themselves in a very tough situation. It is a pathway to self-fulfillment. I think that was a kind of a culture shock to me by hearing those responses. The life in the military will achieve a self-fulfillment in life. It is not about selfish desires, rather the gaining of experience in discipline, service to the nation, and a sense of camaraderie, and the joy of being useful to others. The self-defense forces personnel will be able to study overseas, and they will be given opportunities to study foreign languages, including English. They can study the foreign language without any charge. Overseas, there are opportunities of broadcasting military-related documentaries, and then I think that there is no perfect approach when it comes to the PR activities. I think it is important to communicate the essence and the purpose of the organization is crucially important. And that is about recommendation 8.
Now, I would like to pose the questions to the panelists. And I would also like to pose questions from the audience to panelists. First, so this is a question on treatment. I'm sure many of you are interested in this, but about the National Compensation Pension System, is this de facto public officers' pension? Rear Admiral Kawakami, please. Thank you for that question. This may be repetitive, but this recommendation is because the duties that SDF personnel are devoted to are quite difficult and demanding, and as compensation, in that sense, it may be based on the similar thinking behind public officers' pension, and this should be incorporated in the current pension system. Public officers' system, there still exists such a system, but this is mainly pension system during the world wars. And I think the perception in Japan about public officers' pension system is not favorable. Many people may have negative impression. As the chair mentioned, if the ball pitch is too difficult, that is not good. The pitch has to be hit by a batter. And the recommendation is such that we want these recommendations to be actually implemented. At the risk of being misunderstood, the SDF personnel are sacrificing themselves to defend the countries, and we would like them to be accorded a special treatment.
There's a question from the floor. So Kawakami-san, please continue to reply. What about with the fixed term, the SDF personnel system? How do you see this kind of this system? Well, within the study group, we had a discussion about this. My personal opinion on this topic. Then I would like to hand over the microphone if any additional opinions. What we discussed within the group, I think in the past, the fixed term, the personnel, that should be replaced by non-fixed term. Otherwise, there will be no way out. But diversification of the work style, that is the current trend. Rather, I think there should be a step-up approach to be applied. There are young people who prefer this kind of approach. Given that fact, within the recommendation 3, there was a reference to this point. Diversified views can coexist, but if it is going to be the repetition of the term, and then if there are going to be, I think there should be the core of people who should maintain the structure, but other than that, there will be a flexible approach to be adopted. I think the young people today, they live in the place earlier, and I think this is a kind of the approach or practice by young people. I think we have adjusted our employment practice and to the requirements of the young people.
Then a question from myself about public-private cooperation presented by Vice Admiral Shibata. It is often said that there needs to be public-private cooperation, but I think it's easier said than done. How can there be actual public-private cooperation? Thank you for that question. To encourage public-private cooperation, as I've presented the recommendation earlier, there are many challenges, especially there are 3 challenges. First is building relationship based on trust between the public and the private. To reinforce a human resource-based foundation for SDF, it is important that there be public-private cooperation. There has to be mutual understanding between the public and the private sector, and including exchange of views sessions such as today's. We should listen to the opinions of the private sector at the public side. Such two-way communication is necessary. For example, private sector companies' cooperation should be facilitated in the contract format. The second point is, as I mentioned earlier, in emergencies, we need to use the capabilities of the private sector, and therefore we have to analyze the risks and take appropriate measures. Basically, SDF personnel should be deployed in the dangerous front lines, but in the logistics, there may be a situation where we absolutely need private sector capabilities. In that case, the risk on the front line in the field should be analyzed fully and responded to alleviate the risk, be it equipment or training or security safety management, or, as I mentioned earlier, compensation. Inclusive of these, there should be adequate support from the government. I think that is key. And another point is, and I believe there are retired people from Ministry of Defense and SDF in the audience today, and these are former MOD and SDF personnel. Active participation in the private sector is also important in the public-private cooperation. In recommendation 4, bold revision of reserve SDF personnel was recommended, and retired personnel has knowledge, experience, and skills regarding the self-defense forces. So for public-private cooperation, they can immediately be instrumental, and we need to prepare an environment to realize this. I also have studied much about defense industry, and when it comes to public-private cooperation, it says that public and private should work as one, but oftentimes that may not be the sense shared in the private sector, and the public may be somewhat looking down on the private sector. Private sector, it's not a top-down where everything is decided by the top management, oftentimes these days, and therefore I think this is a new and old challenge, and very important challenge. But it also means that we are at a juncture where this has to be solved.
Now, next to reserve personnel, Admiral Murakawa. Compared to other countries, our own system, Now, my friend has a good knowledge about reserve personnel, but when they are called into training, that just digging holes will be their job. So, any take on this topic? I think I mentioned in my own presentation, when it comes to other countries, reserved force, they are integrated into the active duty army, military. In the case of SDF, that the reserve personnel is supposed to provide support to active and duty service persons. And as has been already mentioned, I think that particular part of the task is to be performed by ready reserve personnel. Whether they are motivated to that or not, that is a big issue. I'm not speaking ill of reserve personnel. I think the SDF, rather, should think about this. That means, from the very beginning, I think, just leave it as the organization, and that is supposed to be dependent on the capacity of reserve personnel. That kind of approach is necessary. I think this is a part of the public and private collaboration. That means in the private sector, that the private sector companies may need to understand the role of reserve personnel and ready to offer support to the SDF. There should be appropriate compensation to be paid and to the private sector companies as well. When the reserve personnel are called to duty, they will feel comfortable with working and for the self-defense force. That is important.
We experienced COVID pandemic and training was difficult. And I hear that some dropped off from reservist duties. Even if they volunteer, it's unfortunate to hear that some leave. And I hope that they will be able to enjoy sense of fulfillment. And I think there can be some change on the part of SDF to enable that. And what is difficult is education. In schools, to give national defense education and SDF education, there can be a criticism that this is an attempt to brainwash. And would you like to address that question, Lieutenant General Miyagawa? Thank you. This is a frequently asked question. First, education and brainwashing, the purposes are entirely different. As you know, education is not something that is imposed upon. It is guiding students to show them that these are academic studies and encourage them to study on their own. Brainwashing is pressuring people to head towards a certain direction. And that is the brainwashing. And what we are saying in our recommendation is the former, education. So I don't think the criticism as such is not the right criticism. But what is important here is that education be an objective education. For example, what kind of work do SDF personnel engage in, and what does it mean to defend the country? What kind of workplace is it? These questions should be answered in as objective as possible way, seen from anyone's perspective. For example, these days, children want to become or take a tour of the firefighting brigades during the social science studies, or during the traffic safety week, campaign week. Police will come to the school, so children come to contact with firefighters and policemen. And So objectively, equally similar to firefighters and policemen, SDF personnel should be able to visit schools to teach what SDF does and what equipment SDF has. I think that may be one possible idea, and that is why we made this recommendation.
Admiral Murakawa, any comment? As Lieutenant General mentioned, Miyagawa, I think this is somewhat misleading, but there is some facts and information that needs to be imposed or communicated. For example, in the case of earthquake, what needs to do as an action is frequently taught to pupils. And for example, in our case, if a missile drops, are we teaching to pupils how to react? There are some schools doing that, but what about the rest? J Alert is a service that is being offered early in the morning if it is going to go off. And then there is a complaint that no alarm going off early in the morning. There is no place to hide. And that is true in some sense. To protect yourselves, what action is necessary? I think similar in the case of a tsunami or earthquake. As I mentioned in the discussion, Geneva Convention, Japan is a signatory to that convention. And then there should be the humanitarian treatment of prisoners. Those who are injured in the fighting, how they are going to be treated are stipulated in the Geneva Convention. I think Article 47, the signatories, non-combatants and combatants, how they are treated and should be taught to students in the signatories. I have no memory of being taught about the Geneva Convention at schools. I think this is something that we may need to recognize, but this has to be taught. Therefore, I think in the post-war period, there were some the military servicemen who lost their lives as war criminals. So I think what we have to teach what national defense should mean.
Thank you. And Japan is facing the age when population is declining, and organizational structure of SDF may have to be transformed. Without losing defense capabilities, national defense capabilities, it may be difficult to achieve this. How can this challenge be overcome? General Yamazaki. Thank you for that question. Because of demographic change, there is a more fierce competition for labor, and we have to secure a sufficient number of SDF personnel, and this is of utmost importance. This should be considered a priority for the nation as well. And we also have to establish a structure that can fight the future of war. And so based on the current and the future demographic change, with the understanding of such demographic change, we have to think about the organization that is in line with that. And as a recommendation says, SDF should be focused solely on duties that only SDF can fulfill. And amongst SDF personnel, including reservists, are there any things that can be outsourced to reservists and private sector? And such organizational structure should be established with the efforts of the government as a whole and nation as a whole. And ever since I was in active duty, this has been discussed over many years, but there has not been much progress in the discussion. But what is required of us is to have strong determination and willingness to change the organization and reform the organization. Without such strong determination, we cannot cope with the changes in the future. not only the organizational aspect, but AI or automation should also be introduced in the operations. This also has been discussed over many years, but it's true that there has not been much progress. I think this is a matter of requiring a strong resolution as an organization as a whole by SDF. Use of private sector capabilities also have been discussed over many years, but have not been realized. Without utilizing private sector capabilities, SDF will not be able to fulfill its duties in the future of war. So we have to prepare for this starting now. There are ground, maritime, and air self-defense forces and JSO, and all of them organization-wide have to be determined to implement this, and it may be difficult to do everything at once. So there can be, for example, one area, be it education or supply and logistics. We should collect the wisdom and start with a pilot and expand the efforts. And until this is completed, it has to be monitored. I think that is also important. To summarize, organizational reform has to be started now. Otherwise, we do not have a future. I think we are in such a crisis situation. Looking at the demographic change, we are having to recruit from shrinking population, and quality is also changing. We have to face this squarely and start preparing now.
I think private and the public and collaboration, when it comes to the private sector, bidding process may be required, and then there is a kind of a rule established. So going forward, how those two sectors are going to collaborate more fully. This is not only a matter of a task that can be managed by the self-defense forces. We have a lot of questions from the audience. We would like to respond to them as many as possible. I think this question for Mr. Kuroe, the draft system, and then 2-year service is going to be offered, and then a reserve system is going to be combined. That would be a better way and to have a better understanding of the role of the self-defense forces. Thank you very much for the question. Within the study group discussion for 1 year, there was no intensive discussion about the draft system. Therefore, this is going to be more like a personal observation, and then I would like to invite others to make comments. On a personal note, as I mentioned at the outset, within this recommendation policy, I think that the ball to be thrown and should be an appropriate one, because the draft system is too demanding for us to accept. And it has been mentioned with regard to the formation of the units, and we have been discussing about the purpose of those units. It is going to be a advanced and technologically advanced unit, which is essential, like only 2 years being drafted, and then whether those servicemen or women, whether they will be able to digest those technological advancements, and those who are not going to volunteer, who are not ready to fight for the country, if they are going to be forced to fight for the country, whether that approach is feasible or not, whether it is going to make any contribution to the fighting capability. And as one more thing that I would like to mention, those who are unwilling to fight are going to be drawn into the draft system, whether this kind of idea is going to be accepted by the society. Looking at the current situation, that is not the case. For example, the constitutional constraints and the interpretation of Constitution, Article 13 and Article 14, the draft system, may go against those two articles. Therefore, that the societal obligation and to accept the draft system, whether this has to be approved or not, and then it would go against the individual will. If the Constitution is going to be reformed, it may be changed, but the sequence and should be reversed. I don't think that the society is ready to accept the draft system. So at this point in time, I do not think it is going to be a feasible solution. If I may say more, my ideal is that the people who are willing and to fight for the country are going to volunteer for the SDF, and that is going to be the ideal situation. That's my view. If I may add, the draft system with regard to this question, the national security is supposed to be borne by the whole nation or the people. Therefore, looking at other countries in Europe, for example, I think there are some countries that have the draft system, and those countries that are talking actively about the draft system. On the other hand, the volunteer system is also does exist. Therefore, I think that the national security should be the obligation of the people of a specific country. And so the system itself adjusted into the requirement. When it comes to our country, I think the system should be fully supported by the people, and the system should be desired by the voters. That means, if I may use the chair's view, I think the voluntary system is something that is accepted by the people. I think that is more favorable. However, at the same time, that we have to secure the number of the SDF and personnel in a stable manner in the declining birth rate situation, and what actions are necessary. These are the things that we have to discuss fully, and based on the discussion, we have to seek the national support for the actions to come. So what is important is to stably secure the number of personnel.
As a follow-up to that, regarding securing sufficient personnel in the United States or in France, foreign nationals, after serving for a certain period of time, may be given citizenship. And will such system be introduced? Can such system be introduced in Japan? That is the question. Chair Kuroe, please. In autumn last year, we visited Australia, and Australian military started to accept New Zealand citizen who does not have Australian citizenship, so long as they are permanent residents of Australia, to allow in Australian military. Nominally, a population is gradually increasing in Australia, but in effect, population is declining. Immigration is making up for the decline in people who were originally living in Australia. So Australian military is also struggling to recruit. And last year, New Zealanders are accepted, and amongst the Five Eyes countries, this year, the policy is to accept those who volunteer from Five Eyes countries. So in National Defense Organization, to have foreign citizens is not so strange. That is the global trend. It's not so unusual, but in Japan, can we directly transplant such a system in Japan? Well, we are not even using the word immigration, while we are seeing increasing number of foreign workers in Japanese society. And so there is a hesitance to use the word immigration, and to have foreign citizens enlist in Japanese self-defense forces. Before discussing that, I think we have to look at the source issues, and a potential is, for example, increased number of women who enlist. So it may not be an immediate, realistic policy, but it doesn't mean that it should be rejected all at once, for example, depending on certain job types. At the moment, you are thinking that there are other avenues, such as women and healthy retired personnel. But in the future, it is not that this will not be discussed at all, but there's a room to consider.
And about education. And the establishment of National Security Faculty Tetsuro University has such a faculty. And aside from that, there are some universities that are thinking about that. And there was a question raised by a student at Tetsuro University. What about the current situation? Thank you for the question. When it comes to the graduate school, we have 2 or 3 graduate school level national security school. But in this recommendation, we are talking about the undergraduate level. The objective of this recommendation is that, as we mentioned, the policy recommendation, we have to put in place a system from the elementary school through high school, where the national security study can be done. That for example, economic security, food security, there are different areas, environmental security as well. They should be combined together to form the national security. That means that kind of approach is going to be adopted throughout the whole school-age education. At this point in time, there is no major progress, but going forward, based on this kind of policy recommendation, we are looking forward to a new action to be taken toward this goal. That's it.
Other questions also, there are questions related to collaboration with the Ministry of Education. Ministry of Defense alone cannot do this, and national government has to take initiative because it involves other ministries and agencies, and also intentions of the universities need to be taken into account. So this may be not so easy. This is a question on public relations, so I would like to take up that question, so that families can engage in public relations, education of the families. People may not have the right aptitude. Everyone may not have the right aptitude for public relations. That is certainly the case, and that is why we are recommending the need for education. We are not simply saying that family members. Well, in the United States, April is Military Child Month to appreciate military children, and there is also a Military Spouse Day to acknowledge the contribution of the military spouses. I personally think these can be introduced in SDF, but in Japan, but I think the experience level, knowledge level in the U.S. Are higher, so this means that education is indispensable.
Next question. I think this is for Kawakami, Rear Admiral Kawakami-san. That what about the private sector educational program with regard to the role of the SDF? Thank you very much. The education leading up into the career upgrading, I think this has been done in the private sector as well. But if I may recap, in the case of the UK, this example I would like to reshare with you. In the private sector, there's going to be a burden to provide basic education to the new grads. In the case of UK, the private sector companies would like to have employees, recruits with the track records. Therefore, they are expecting this kind of role to be played by the military, because the military they hires new grads. In the context of Japan, in the case of big name companies, and they can hire new graduates in order to teach social etiquette in the induction training. But this kind of a thing is going to be burdensome in some cases. And I think that's exactly what happens in the UK. Therefore, I think the self-defense forces will be able to provide well-established induction training, and that may lead into positive results in recruitment. But that said, that means it is going to mean more burden on the SDF. In order to avoid that kind of situation, we may leverage on the resources of retired personnel, and they can be hired as trainers.
Thank you. Next question is about retirement age and re-enlistment. So timing of retirement, physically and cognitively, the capability may differ between individuals. So testing to allow for longer years of service, depending on the individual capability, may be worth considering. We already have re-enlistment system, and depending on the job types, extension of service years is already possible. There will be rigorous tests every year, and when test is passed, extension is allowed. As for retirement, there is often a question of what people do after retiring from SDF personnel. As for extension of retirement age, it is extended by 2 years at the moment, but there is a question of what to do in the future. In the future, well, if people are not able to fight, or if SDF is not able to fight, it doesn't mean that we are fulfilling the expectations of the public. So first of all, the organization has to be able to fight and be able to deter. That is the very big premise. And areas where only the SDF personnel can fulfill the duties are more and more focused on fighting areas that require fighting. And recently, cyber and EM warfare and outer space or cognitive warfare or information warfare, these are also inclusively the battlefields. And we have to maintain organization that can fight in these areas. And we have to analyze what skills are needed to be able to fight in these areas. And we also have to ascertain the age bracket that have the ability to fight these wars. And based on such analysis, we should consider extension of the retirement age and posts where re-enlisted personnel can be hired. Can effective extension of retirement be possible by reassigning retired SDF personnel to non-combat duties? Well, ground, maritime, air, cyber, etc. In these warfares, the requirements of capabilities and in non-combat duties, in administrative work, in office work, there are different skills that are required, and from SDF, there are already people who have volunteered to be posted to office work or after retirement as SDF personnel to be rehired in office work. And naturally, we have to consider these. And beyond that, we also should look into utilizing retired SDF personnel and private sector capabilities. Because of the shrinking population, we have to consider from the perspective of making full use of available talent. In many ways, mobility of labor should be promoted.
This is going to be a difficult question. I think there's going to be a problem to be raised with regard to the preferential treatment to SDF because other similar the employees such as police officers and the Coast Guard officials, how they are going to be treated, and what is the reason behind the special treatment and to SDF? What about this? How are you going to respond to this question, Mr. Kuroe? I fully understand the question. I think the Coast Guard and staff, I sometimes have discussions with them. I think they also have similar concerns, similar to ours as well. That's the reality. In particular, given the situation of the Senkaku Islands, the Coast Guard is playing a leading role. Therefore, there's a kind of a competition against China. They are facing up the tough daily situation. And I've been to Ishigaki Island and I saw the situation on the ground. So given that fact, how the treatment of SDF personnel is going to be improved, given the difficulty of the job that they are facing up to. I think the same thing can be said about the police officers as well as Coast Guard officials, because they are enforcing their power in order to protect the public interest. Therefore, given this fact, the pension system that we are talking about, it is going to be a compensation for the tough duty that they are going to be engaged in. And that compensation is to be provided by the national government. This kind of approach should also be applied to the Coast Guard as well as police officers. Therefore, given this policy recommendation, and I hope that the audience will be able to understand the purpose and the objective of a policy recommendation, and I hope that not only the SDF personnel, also the National Guard and the police officers, and overall I have some concern, but there is a not sufficient respect to those who are working for in the public service. I think that is the objective that I have in mind. The book was Kuroe-san authored a book, and I do understand that how the public official was a tough job because always buying an apology and had a back pain as a result. Not only the SDF personnel, but also others, those who are serving the national interest. The treatment of those may need to be included in the overall consideration. That's our view. And in addition to that, there was another question. The empowerment of women in order to, it was not particularly highlighted.
Thank you. This is, I take responsibility for not emphasizing the active participation of women, and I apologize. It's not intentionally that we removed any mention of women. This is an interim report. We will be spending one more year amongst our project team to further discuss, and we would like to consider the active involvement of women, and we hope to be able to report to you the outcome in the future. And public-private cooperation, but public cooperation, firefighting, JCG, and police and SDF cooperation, should that be included as well? Vice Admiral Shibata, please. As population is shrinking, as Chair mentioned at the outset, not just the public and private sector, but cooperation with various different ministries and agencies is also very important. What is important regarding public-private sector cooperation is that we have to define roles and responsibilities, but what cannot be done even by private sector, what cannot be done even by SDF, there are such areas certainly. And with relevant ministries and agencies and organizations, we need to cooperate. So we use the phrase public and private, but public cooperation is also necessary.
The mobility of manpower for example, after retirement, switching the job to the fire service or the police, that would be one option. Therefore, there should be a kind of horizontal flow of mobility. It may be another option or possibility we may need and to pursue. With regard to this policy recommendation, this is an interim report. Therefore, as was touched upon in the question, going forward, how this is going to be materialized. So I would like to invite Ms. Kuroe and to make a summary. Well, thank you very much and for staying with us for many hours. As has been mentioned by Sakurabayashi-san, this is an interim report. Therefore, there are many tasks that are not solved. For example, as I mentioned, the oath to take by the service officers, not only in the military personnel, the SDF personnel, but also non-uniform the officials may need to take an oath like this. So that's how the treatment is done. This is going to be an important thing that we continue to discuss. I intended to mention this. The social infrastructure is extremely important, which is being highlighted in the current constitution, whether the importance of the national service. If that is going to be clearly emphasized in the constitution, the social infrastructure should have been changed a lot. But we can't wait for the amendment. That, as I mentioned, that there's not going to be a too demanding the request to be not to be made. Looking at the current situation, there was a lot of discussion on the constitutional reform, but it is not the case so far. Now, there is the growing opposition party status. I think when it comes to the realistic approach or the policy discussion, that kind of a requirement or the momentum is gaining. I hope that the constitutional reform discussion will be included in that kind of context. I think that we would like to avoid the situation that the self-defense forces related discussion that will be avoided within the constraints of the Constitution. Going forward, we are going to provide update on our discussion on the enhancing the foundation for human resource base of defense capability. Once again, thank you really very much.
Thank you very much. If there is one last burning comment that project team members would like to make, if not, thank you very much for your attendance. I will turn the microphone over to the moderator. Thank you very much to all of the panelists. We will now have closing remarks. Please remain where you are. Last but not least, I would like to invite Rear Admiral Yasuhiro Kawakami, Director, General Affairs and Networking Program, Japan-U.S. and Security Studies Unit, Sasakawa Peace Foundation, to give closing remarks.
Well, thank you very much for participating in the SPF Security Strategy Forum policy recommendation on enhancing the foundation for human resources base of defense capabilities despite your busy schedule. Once again, thank you very much. I would also like to express my gratitude to all of you who spoke on stage as members of the study group on the foundation for human resource base of defense capabilities. This study group invited experts with diverse knowledge and expertise to engage in discussions from different perspectives. For example, regarding education on national security, which is one of the major recommendation items. In public opinion survey conducted by the Cabinet Office in November 2022, approximately 1,600 people responded to the question, should national defense be covered in education? With 47.8% saying it should be covered, and 41.4% are saying it should be covered to some extent, totaling approximately 90%. Thus, although many citizens would like education national defense, the reality is that, as we have discussed today, education on national defense is rarely implemented, and it is extremely important to make a quick change to the situation. I also believe that you have understood that it is clear that compared to other countries, Japan falls short in terms of the treatment, and this was going to make a good contribution into the improvement of the treatment of the SDF personnel. And compared to other countries, the treatment of the SDF personnel is not sufficient. At the same time, we conducted a public survey overseas. They also face a common difficulty in recruitment, and unconstrained by the existing framework, they are making extra efforts in this endeavor. Going forward, Japan should not be constrained by the existing frameworks, and we have to be proactive in adopting different approaches. I think this can be said about the public relations activities and reserve personnel and system. There should be the whole of government approach and to put in place the social infrastructure improvement and recognition and acknowledgement of the special uniqueness of the SDF. I hope that the audience would be given an opportunity to have understanding about this. And going forward, I truly hope that all of you will serve as a support group so that our message can be delivered and to a different target audience. This group will continue to deepen its discussion, so we would appreciate your continued support and guidance. With these brief comments, I would like to conclude my closing remarks. Once again, thank you really very much. Rear Admiral Kawakami, thank you very much. With this, I would like to announce the closing of the policy recommendation on enhancing the foundation for human resource base of defense capabilities. The policy recommendation will be uploaded on our website. Please refer to that. And the entrance card, and please make sure you will return it at the reception on the first floor. Once again, thank you very much for your participation. Please check whether, please be reminded of not leaving anything behind.